Hello, everyone, and welcome to another book club episode. I'm joined again by my guest, New York Times and USA Today bestselling author, Megan Lally. Megan, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me again.
Now, the obvious question, Megan, what is your relationship to reading, and do you like to read?
I do like to read. I am definitely a feel it out kind of reader. So like I can't read every day if I don't feel like reading.
Oh,
But the second I get sucked into a book, I will drop all my responsibilities and forget what time it is, and it'll be 4 o'clock in the morning, and I am reading
mhm.
the entire thing. So sometimes there'll be like droughts where I haven't read anything in 4 months, but then I'll read 27 books in a month, and then I catch up to my Goodreads reading goal. But it's very chaotic,
Yes.
everything else that I do. But I am extremely attached to my reading schedule in whatever form it comes to me.
Okay. Okay. So, what form do you like to read? Are you an audiobook, physical, ebook?
I feel like that comes in tides too, because if I'm really
Okay.
busy, I'm cleaning my house, it's just audiobook city
Yeah.
time, or like long drives, it'll just be one
Yes.
after another.
Yes.
And then eventually I'll get really like burned out on having headphones on all the time or something, and then I'll
Uh-huh.
end up dipping into like my Kindle Unlimited, and then it's just nonstop ebooks 24/7 for like
Mhm.
a whole month. And then eventually, I think the rarest one is probably physical copies, because having to sit down and physically pick it up, carry it with you, hold it seems to be very difficult for me. But I have so many that I have bought in bookstores, and they're just
Uh-huh.
piling, and so then I'll get really guilty and I'll read a few of those in a row. But I would say almost always audiobook or ebook, and then well, I'm guilted into my physical. I have several
Mm.
physical copies that I got on audio just so I would read it faster.
I was gonna ask. Okay, so you have a lot of physical books then. Is buying books like its own hobby for you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Every
yeah.
time I have another whole box that shows up from somewhere, my husband's like, "You haven't read so many of the ones in your office."
Mhm.
And I'm like, "We're talking about different things.
Yeah.
Like, this is one hobby, reading them is
Yeah.
a different thing, and we
Yeah.
don't intermingle."
Now, do you finish every book you read?
Yes,
Oh.
I have a hard time not finishing books, because I always have the hope that whatever I don't like about it is going to be resolved later.
Ah,
I
interesting.
I do reach the end of some books and like throw them down a flight of stairs, because that did. But
Yeah.
I try to give it the benefit of the doubt, because like until you've read the whole story, you don't know the whole story. So
Mhm.
there's a chance that that book, you might hate it for 75% of it, and then the last 25 is going to ruin your life in the best way, and then you're on board and you're like, how did they trick me? Like I hold
Mhm.
out the hope that maybe I'm wrong. I'm not often wrong, and sometimes I wish I had not finished reading it, but I will give all. If I've started it, if I got in it enough to read beyond like the 25% mark, I'm going to finish the book.
Mhm. And are you usually reading in the same genre that you're writing, or do you have to not while you're writing?
No, I feel so bad, because like 99% of what I'm reading is nothing, even in the YA space. Like I have books that I have had that I've been so excited about, and I'm like, I can't wait to read this thriller. It's going to be so exciting. And then I just read like nonstop cowboy romances for like 6 months, and I'm like, I'm never going to write one of these, but they're all I want to read. And I have a running theory that because what I write is so dark, I need to be reading like light, happy love story to balance.
Yeah.
So I don't feel entirely guilty, but like every
Uh-huh.
once in a while I'll be like, things are going pretty well, or it's a break between edits or something where I'm not working on the dark stuff, and then
Mhm.
I'll try to binge as many dark books as I can before I'm back to creating the dark stuff, because then it's all romance all the time, nonstop.
Okay, that was gonna be my question. What are the genres that you like to read? So romance and like dark mystery thrillers.
Yeah, yeah. I also I love YA kind of as a general scope. And so
Same.
I'll try almost anything in YA. And I think that that's probably my most versatile area of reading. Whereas, like, I'm not going to read everything in romance. I'm like very specific about the things
Yeah.
I like. There just happens to be millions of those, so I'll never run out of them, and it's fine. But in YA, there's a lot more variance in genre. Whereas, like on the adult market side, if it's not adult romance, I'm probably not going to read it.
So then what are some of your favorite books?
Oh, God, I loved the Scorpio Races by Maggie Stiefvater.
Never read them.
That
Okay.
book is so beautiful, and, like, I picked it up. I had read her previous series about werewolves, in my paranormal romance era. I
Mm,
picked that up because I was like, "Ooh, wolves, that's so great," and they, like,
yeah.
turned into actual wolves instead of, like, wolf creatures, and I was like, "Well, that's a cool thing," so I read that whole
Oh,
trilogy, and then the Scorpio Races came out next, and it was a standalone, and the only reason that I was like, immediately, "I don't need to hear anything about this, I'm gonna buy it," is because I saw somewhere she was advertising it where she had said that it has like a Darcy-esque love interest, and I
oh,
obsessed with Pride and Prejudice, and I was like, "Tell me less, I got it, it's fine, that's what I want."
yeah.
And it's so good. It's about like water horses that come out of the
Okay.
ocean and they'll like eat you. But they race them. They race them on the coast. And
Oh,
whoever wins, like it'll change their whole life with all this money and whatever. And there's two, the love interests are competing in the same race. And so you kind of want each of them to
yeah.
win. It's like, oh, this is
Yes.
awful. It's so good. And it's like it's kind of Ireland, Scotland vibes,
Location.
like
Okay.
rainy and like
Yeah.
island and stuff. And it's like, oh, it's so cool. I love it so much. I also am a huge Courtney Summers fan. And so I love Sadie. Sadie is,
Okay.
I mean,
I haven't read it, but I know I can see it. The
it's
cover on.
so good. I also love This Is Not a Test from Courtney Summers is like a fundamental book in my brain because it is a book
Mm.
about a zombie apocalypse that is not actually about a zombie apocalypse. And like the way that she wrote that book,
Oh.
oh, it's incredible. So
Oh.
forever Courtney Summers fan. I love Natalie Richards books. Um, I am a huge Elsie Silver fan. There's my cowboy romance rack of the day. I've
Mm-hmm.
read every single book, every book that she's ever published. I've read all of them. One or two I've read like three times. Um, and gosh, Courtney Gould, all of Courtney Gould's queer horror are incredible. The most recent one is about wilderness therapy, and there's like monsters in the wilderness, and it's awesome.
Oh.
I also have never read an Allison Saft book that I didn't love.
Okay.
Every single one is so good.
I haven't read like any of these, and some of them I recognize like the titles or the authors. So I'm intrigued. I'm interested, and it's such a wide like range of stories that you like.
I bounce around a lot.
And so what are some of like the tropes or themes or things you like to see in any kind of story that really like makes you want to read it?
Ugh, if it is more on the darker side and we're talking like mysteries and things like
Mm,
that, I love it when it's got something in the pitch or in the back copy or something that makes it stand out, where it's like a
mm,
certain type of crime or a certain type of killer, and I'm just like, I want to see what happened. Like that,
yeah,
almost like the same thing I get when I see a summary for a true crime podcast and I see what the podcast is about. And I'm like,
yeah,
"Okay, this isn't like run of the mill, someone picked up a hitchhiker. This is worse.
yeah,
This is better."
yeah.
I love those ones. Anything that can like draw me in from the pitch alone feels so high concept that I'm just like down for it. When it comes to
Okay.
anything YA or adult romance that has a romantic element in it, if the love interest is not grumpy, I'm probably not going to like him. Like he,
Oh,
he
okay,
like
okay.
the Darcy aspect comes back around once again, like he cannot be like this
Hmm.
wonderful gummy bear person who's so supportive because then I'm like, I am not interested in this. Um,
Okay.
I
This
will
is
read
helping
it.
me.
I'll read it if
Yeah.
the opposite love interest is the grumpy one because then I get it from somewhere. But like it has to have some kind of banter for me to really love it. I've had
Mm,
lots of books where I've read that they're like the cinnamon roll guy and whatever.
hmm.
And like I like the book just fine. But if I'm gonna really, really love the book, then most often he has to be super grumpy and they have to
Hmm.
fight somehow. Like banter, some kind of funny back and
Yes.
forth has
Okay.
to happen. Um,
Okay.
I recently was looking at my whole like 2024 reading thing and I was like, why did I love some of these and I didn't like the other ones? And it was literally just the only difference was humor.
Oh,
Whatever was
interesting. Yeah.
happening and across the board, YA, adult, whatever it was. If it wasn't like, murder, but people are cracking jokes, I
Yeah.
probably wasn't going to love it as much if it was just nonstop serious the whole time.
So then what is a book that you always recommend to somebody else, and what is a book that has continuously been recommended to you?
Okay. I always recommend lately in the last year and a half since it came out, I always recommend A Fragile Enchantment
Never read it.
by Allison Saft.
Okay.
It is so, so good. And it has kind of like the love interest aspect that I love so much. Like that really works for me.
Okay.
And so that one definitely. I also have spent a lot of time recommending Five Total Strangers by Natalie Richards. Uh,
That sounds familiar.
that one's
Okay.
really actually here. This one. This one.
Yes, I've read that. I read that years ago. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh. I was like, why does it sound familiar? Yes.
that one's really good. Whenever someone asks, like, "Oh, I really liked, That's Not My Name" or something. What's another book that's similar? That's one of the first ones that I throw out because that one's so
Yes.
good with like the manipulation and stuff in that one.
Yes.
So, so good. I also always recommend Sadie by Courtney.
Okay. Okay.
Because that one is like it's such a good book in especially the audiobook because the book is half podcast and half what really happened, back
Hmm.
then. And so the podcast having happened all long after, it's like you're waiting for the podcast to spoil
Yeah,
what
yeah, yeah.
but the audiobook, they produce the podcast like a real podcast. And so you're
Oh,
listening to
wow.
narration, and then all of a sudden it's a podcast episode, and then it's more narration, and it's so good. It's probably the best audiobook that I've ever listened to ever.
Oh, okay. Noted. If I
Yeah.
read it, listen to the audiobook. And
Yes.
also, what a extra length to write that in a podcast form.
Yeah. It was perfect. Like that's the only way that book could have been written. Like
Hmm.
I could not I mean, I'm sure there's other
Yeah.
ways the magic could have unfolded, but like I could not imagine a better way for that story
Uh-huh.
to be told than how it was.
Okay, then that one's on my list too. Yeah, Five Total Strangers. Now that you say that, I like remembering inklings of it, and it's a premise similar to No Place Left to Hide in one of the books I'm going to recommend to you later. Um, that I enjoy, and I think as you're getting to know the people that are, in the car and like how do they relate to one another, etc. Yes, I remember. I always like that. I always like a trope of like something also happening in one night. Like I
Yeah.
always think that that's so interesting and
Mhm.
fun to read.
And that one was
Um,
fun being in the middle of a snowstorm too. Like that
yeah,
way worse, which is so cool.
yeah. Well, speaking of, let me give some book recommendations to you.
Okay.
And the first one relates to that. It is one of my favorite books and probably the first. Everybody who listens to this, I know you guys have heard this a million times, season 7, and we're still talking about this book, but it is one that I was on the edge of my seat till the very end, and it's called No Exit by Taylor Adams. And it
Okay.
is about a a young college girl who is going across country to see her sick mother, and she's driving in the middle of a snowstorm, and she has to pull off at a rest stop because she cannot drive anymore. It's like not safe. And there are a couple people at the rest stop, a couple cars. So she goes in, and by the way, there's a Hulu movie, don't watch it. But anyway, she she goes in and she's like looking for cell service, can't find any. So she goes outside to get cell service, looks into the back of one of the cars that's in the parking lot that they're snowed in at the rest stop, and sees a young girl in a cage. And in that moment, she has to decide, what do I do? Like, we're trapped here. I'm trapped to somebody. This poor girl's going to freeze. She's also being kidnapped or something. And the whole story is just unravels from there. And it was so good. So
Oh,
good.
see, that's what I mean. Girl in a cage in the back seat. That is the little detail
Yes.
that is gonna make me want to read. Yes.
Literally, literally. And it's what I read on the back of the page that like made me want to read. And then the next one I have for you is YA, and it's called None Shall Sleep by Ellie Marney. I've talked about it quite a bit on this podcast, and it's basically a young adult Silence of the Lambs. A we have a teenager who is the survivor of a horrible crime and serial killer, and it's years later after it's happened, and she teams up with the FBI and this other young guy who's like his dad was a marshal, a US marshal, and he's kind of in training with the FBI, and they team up to help interview teenage serial killers. And one of the teenage serial killers we interview, Simon, is like a main character in it, at the same time that like an active serial killer is on the loose, and they get wrapped up in it all. And it's the third
Oh,
book comes out February 7th. I'm so excited. It's so good. So good. And then the next one, I wonder if you've read it because it for people who really like your book, No Place Left to Hide. I feel like it's a good book to read after. Five Survive by Holly Jackson, who wrote A Good Girl's Guide to Murder.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Have you read it?
Yes.
And it all happens in one night on a road trip. And so that was the first book I'd read in a very long time that happened in like a span of one night. And I was like, oh, this is something I'm going to look for in a book moving forward. Like, this is really cool and keeps me anxious.
So creative.
I love that. I love the idea. So I'm glad you did that with your second book. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
And then the next one, okay, this is where we get like a little dark. So I wonder, but in a death way. So it's called All the Little Raindrops by Mia Sheridan. And it is a story about two teenagers, and you kind of open the book with them abducted in cages. And they're basically, people are paying to do whatever they want to these two teenagers that have been kidnapped. And so it's this horrificness. But then we also flash forward to when they've escaped, however they escaped, and they're finding their way back to one another and kind of figuring out what happened and rekindling their friendship or more. And it was heartbreaking and also like a beautiful story, and I was on the edge of my seat the whole time.
Ugh, that sounds incredible.
And then You Shouldn't Have Come Here by Jeneva Rose is also another love story mixed with a thriller. It's about a girl who lives in New York City. She's a big powerhouse, and she decides she's going to rent an Airbnb in like Wyoming and just go out there and kind of disconnect. And she meets the Airbnb owner, and he's super hot and she loves him. And they're like having this romance, but at the same time in the town, women are going missing. So it was the first book I read where there was like a really big enough romance element to it that felt like, you know, an Emily Henry book romance at the same time that this horrible thing is happening. And you're like, what's going on here? And I'll just tell you, the ending, the twist at the end got me. And so totally worth it. Totally worth it. And then the next three are a little bit more, or the next two are a little bit more calmer, some love stories. The first one is The Most Wonderful Crime of the Year by Allie Carter, which I read on a road trip with my sister at Christmas time. I don't know if you've read this or seen it. It basically, it's described as like Knives Out holiday edition. So it is about these two authors who are rivals and enemies. And they basically, Maggie and then Ethan, and they basically get invited by this author to spend Christmas with her at her house in, I believe it's in Scotland, in like, or is somewhere in the UK it's a beautiful giant estate. And they're so excited to go, and they're, you know, enemies to lovers kind of thing. And at the same time that this is happening, a crime is happening at the house. And so it's very Knives Out, kind of figuring out with all the guests and kind of like Clue, but at the same time you have like this love story happening. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a fun one. And it was a great one to read at like the holiday season.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Do you judge a book by its cover?
Not always, but I've done the opposite where I'll see like a beautiful cover and I'll go, oh, I know exactly what this book is, and I flip it over and read the back and I'm like, no, never mind.
Yeah.
So I guess yes, in that sense, yes. But I have also seen books that have just awful covers, and then I read the back copy and I'm like, no, I'm definitely reading this book.
Yeah,
and so it kind of depends on how it drags my attention the first time.
See, something I haven't done in a minute, because honestly, pre-COVID, I did this. Post-COVID, I couldn't go into the library and obviously get a book, or like during COVID, I had to like put it on hold and like pick it up at one point. And so I haven't gone in, similarly to like a bookstore where you walk around and you just pick up books based on the feel and the cover, and then you read the back. And I want to do that again, because I also feel like I've gotten so many recommendations through social media because it's having its like reading is coming back and everything. I want to do that again. It's just like walk through and have it call to me.
Yeah. And some books really do just kind of shout at you from across the aisle or something, you know?
Yeah. And I love to judge a book by its cover. I love it. I love your covers. I think the font is so good. Like, it just hits. I think No Place Left to Hide. I was like, am I mixing up the names? I think that cover specifically, like the way it's written, and then you can see the road is just chef's
Mhm.
kiss.
There's a fun little tidbit about that. The background image on
Mhm.
that book was originally presented to me as the cover for That's Not My Name, only it had just one car on it. And I was
Really?
like, I had already pitched them this book. And so I was like, well, considering what the next one's going to be, I love this cover, but I think
Oh
it's the
yeah.
cover for what we're doing. And I think they were leaning toward like, van on a deserted road, or they were
Yeah.
doing that.
Yeah.
And I said, if we could do something that had like a cabin on it, I think that it would really fit this one. But then also this image that you've already done is
Yeah.
perfect for the next one.
Yeah.
And so I
Ah,
ended up kind of knowing way in advance what my next one was going to
yeah.
be. It was presented as the first option. So
And the melty like road in it. Oh, so good. So good. That's
yeah,
interesting.
I've been told that the vibe of like creepy, but something's off, or like
Hmm.
nature, but there's something messed up here is kind of
Yeah.
also fitting for what the books are. And so
Yeah.
it's really cool to see that reflected in covers. So
And it's like colorful too. It's not necessarily black and white or like red and like very
yeah,
dark. It has, there's like a little bit of blue and no place left to hide. There's like some
yeah,
green and red, I think it
yeah.
does well. Mm.
Hands out a little bit.
Yeah. Believe it or not, we're at the last three questions of this episode, which is what are you currently reading? What is the next book on your list? And what was the last really good book you read?
Okay. I'm currently reading Lakesedge by Lyndall Clipstone. It is so good. It's in my like I also like haunted books
Mm,
phase. So I took a break from my cowboy romance for like a minute, and then I switched gears and I started reading this one. And so that one's definitely, I'm about halfway through it right now. I'm also halfway through this like billionaire romance that I forget the name of, but
oh.
like that's pretty par for the course for me to be
Mm.
like halfway through multiple things. Um uh the last book that I really loved, I might have to look on my Goodreads for this one. Um, I feel like it's probably a romance because that's all I read for 3 months straight before the holidays.
Mm,
So it's not going to be super shocking.
dark.
Actually, so it's definitely, there it is. Um, okay. The last book that I really loved was Heartless by Elsie Silver.
Okay, I've seen covers of that.
Yes, that one is he is the grumpiest of all of them. Of
Yeah,
all of them, it is so
so
perfect.
perfect.
That one is gonna stick with me for a while because I've read so many books
Mhm.
from Elsie, and that one easily at the top.
Okay.
Easily at the top. That was definitely the last one that I
Mhm.
I loved the most. And what was the third one?
What's next book on your list?
The next book on my list is the third Belladonna book.
Oh, okay.
Wisteria is next in the pile, but that's hopeful. I tend to go, this is what I'm reading next, and I change my mind.
Mm,
Because I have to like be in the right mood for whatever it is. But so
yeah.
far, that is what is planned for what's coming up next. And I'm very excited about that one because to be in that world for another book
Hmm.
is just,
Is this the end?
yes, this is the end.
Okay, wrapping
I
it
think
up.
there is a Christmas one, I think, coming out, but I'm not
Oh,
sure.
okay.
I think this was like the end of the trilogy, and the Christmas one is like a bonus thing, but I have to double
Okay.
check on that. I could be wrong, but it's coming out in like November, I think, so it's like right before the holidays, and so I'm not sure if it's like a novella or not. I need to look into it, but besides that, this is
Mhm.
going to be kind of wrapping it up, which
Mm.
so good.
Yeah, sad but good, right?
Yes, yeah,
It
it's like bittersweet. You reach
really is.
like, can I go back?
Yeah. Can I reread it instead? Yeah. Well, Megan, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for giving me any ounce of your time to talk books and for talking about some of the spoilers and questions off air. Sorry, listeners, that I had about your books. I loved it. Again, you were one of my standout authors this year, and I'm so lucky and happy that you had a second book come out and I got to read it before it came out. Like it was, I really loved both books so
Oh,
much.
thank you. I'm so glad that you like them. And it's so sweet to be able to talk about things that I just like made up in my brain one day. And other people are like, yeah, I love it too. And so this is so much fun. Thank you so much.
Oh, I'm glad. And where can everybody find you? Where can they get your books? Because by the time this episode comes out, No Place Left to Hide is out in the world.
My books are available everywhere. They're everywhere books are sold. No Place Left to Hide is even in Target, which is super fun.
Ooh.
And then I am on Instagram and on TikTok at Megan_Lally_. Mostly on Instagram, I would say that's like my main place where you can find me. And I'm usually just being like real sarcastic over there. So.
We love that.